Well, good afternoon and welcome to the second session of Church Tech Chat. I should put that little Church Tech Chat thing up there to remind me. So today we're going to be talking about worship and mission, and we have a special guest who's going to be talking about funding your live stream ambitions. David, I'm going to introduce briefly. David, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm David Williams. I used to be the Go For It fund manager in the Church of Scotland. But since January, I've become a grants manager, so helping churches to apply for funding both inside and outside the church.
Excellent. So you're going to be talking to us about funding and responding to any questions. So as for those who've been before, do pop into the comments anything that occurs to you. But if you've got questions and other issues to raise, do that. We'll respond to some of those as we go, and we'll pick those up again a little later on. David, we'll see you a little later. And I'd like to bring Brian and Neil back into the forum. Would you like to introduce yourselves as well briefly?
Yeah, well, I'm Brian, and I'm sitting in my study, which is a bit of a dull and boring place to be. And I'm minister in Lanark, and I can't match the background of Mr. McLennan, who's underneath us right now.
Well,
in what looks like a very historic building, Neil.
Well,
Very
actually,
impressive.
it's my new 3D Zoom background, which I hope, and I can reach right into it, and my body doesn't disappear. It really is the latest in technology.
Excellent.
And I'm showcasing that today. You're seeing it first, the 3D Zoom background. Listen. So
that's impressive.
I mean, we like to be first here. We like to be first.
And you coded all that yourself, Neil? Yeah,
absolutely. Just last night, actually, in preparation for this today.
This is just raising the bar for everybody. That's what we like to do.
For folks who are perhaps not too familiar with the Church of Scotland's General Assembly Hall, this is where I am. The Church of Scotland meets in General Assembly beginning next Saturday. And I'm part of just the tech team, setting things up, running cables, making sure that for a mostly online assembly, the moderator and a key set of individuals will be based here in the hall. So it'll be mostly empty, but it still requires a full amount of tech to deliver that to around about 750 online commissioners and delegates in a giant Zoom call beginning next Saturday. And you can watch it live on the Church of Scotland website too. It's live streamed and BSL interpreted as well. So you can look forward to that. But yes, that's my background today.
It's quite impressive, Neil. Quite impressive.
And I'm the ecumenical and international representative, Jeremy, Church of England minister down here in the sunny south of the British Isles. So guys, what have you been doing in church tech or tech generally in the last week?
Remembering how to press buttons, because we are now starting to reopen. We've started to look at what that mix between physical and digital will look like, or as I saw online this week on a resource I was reading, Fidgetal, which I really liked the name of that, and brand a mix of physical and digital. Fidgetal.
I was hearing fidget.
I did think the same. But no, I've been trying to remember how all the buttons worked, making sure. Top tech tip. If you haven't been in your church for several months, switch the computers on a few days in advance of when you actually need to use them, because Microsoft, Apple, or other providers will have sent you 3 million updates, which always want to update just 3 minutes before a service begins.
Of course.
Today's top tip for free.
What about you, Neil?
Well, I mean, clearly I'm at the Assembly Hall, so a lot of tech is very, very practical this week, with a view to just getting what is a hybrid event, in fact. So some of it's with a group of people in the physical space and a majority of folks online. And it's got me thinking that as restrictions continue to loosen, but are not fully loosened, what does the hybrid mix look like for both church and also for meetings and just the functionality of church that makes it tick? How do we cope with folks who are physically present and folks who are on Zoom? And of course, we've been used to a certain level of interactivity. And does that go down the pan when we all meet in person again and we forget everything we've learned? in the online world. So I think this is a really interesting transition phase for church and indeed many organisations, of course, as we move from hybrid, and then what? Maybe that's a question for another week. But what happens after hybrid? Do we just go back to in person again, like that's where we should get to? Not sure about that.
Excellent. I've been I think mostly doing low tech, going and checking if things like sound systems in churches are still working when you turn them on, because we haven't been regularly in those places, and we've suddenly got weddings and things coming up. So checking what's still working and what isn't, and actually taking the opportunity of just checking if mobile signal has suddenly become much stronger. We have no broadband in any churches, but there's a couple where there's sort of marginal 4G signal. So I've got my work cut out over the next couple of weeks to try and turn that marginal into usable.
I will just volunteer one more tech tip on the back of Brian's.
Oh, go for
it. Batteries, they've all died a year and a half. If you use rechargeables on your microphones, I think you should probably look to getting some of those replaced, because they don't hold any charge at all anymore.
No, and technically, if I'm being a proper sound engineer from some of my background, you shouldn't use rechargeables in microphones anyway. It's not good for them. They're not the best batteries. But yes, I understand what you mean. But yeah, it's all these little things, isn't it? That when you're going back, it's just, can you remember even, switching on feeds and streams and things and going back over things just to refresh yourself, because we've done things in such a different way over this last year. It is a challenge getting back. But I do feel for you, Jeremy, praying when you walk around with your mobile phone, dear Lord, please allow us to have a better signal. Come on, Lord. Come on, I'm rooting for you.
It's the power of prayer, I'm telling you. Anyway, so we'd better move on to the next part. So each of us is going to be talking a little bit on subjects underneath worship and live streaming and tech and all of those things. And I'm going to be up first talking about live streaming to engage your ministry. So we'll see you both a little later. The power. So live streaming to engage your ministry. What does that mean? And I don't want to overpromise, because live streaming is definitely a thing which we're all gathered here because we're interested in it or we're active in it. And it's becoming more and more important. Everybody seems to agree. But actually, what is it? How does it work? And I'd like to start by taking a couple of steps back, I guess. Because here's the thing. How do we even find a language to talk about all of these ways in which people are connecting? And Neil was just asking a question, I think, a minute ago. Are we all just going back to what we used to do back in the day? Let's start by thinking about how churches have operated in the past. I think for most churches, it's going to be at least somewhat true, perhaps massively true, that we've thought about what church is. It sort of emanates from probably a gathered Sunday worship service. And then out from that, there are other activities which are happening. People are interacting, perhaps they're meeting for Bible studies. Again, we're going back into the world before 2020, if you can remember back that far. And so on. There was these kind of big gatherings, smaller gatherings, social gatherings, and so on. And then we barely even talked about probably all of the other communication and conversation that was going on. So the problem with that is, I think we can have this mindset as we're preparing for the next stage, the next steps out of pandemic and all the restrictions of life, is we can just be thinking, well, we're going back to that. And what I want to say is, I'm not sure that was ever a realistic picture of how people are, which is surely where we need to start as we think about live streaming into the future. It is, what about people? What were people doing even back before 2020? So if you ask somebody the question, how did you connect with people over the course of the last week? If you ask that any time back in, let's say, 2018, and said, well, actually, can you note that down? Then what will people have done? Well, they will surely have, for many people, have traveled around and met people, sometimes for planned events, but often just casually or unplanned. They've encountered people that they knew and people that they didn't know. They'll have been on the telephone, very likely, for some proportion of those that we're in contact with in church, there will have been an electronic and online aspect to that. So perhaps voice messages and emails and chat systems and Facebook and YouTube and all sorts of other things will have been part of people's lives. And when they made a list, if they were being honest about all of those ways that they've been encountering people, most likely, I think, for most people, that structure exactly tips around. It's not that there was this big gathering called we all got together for church, and then there were these additional gatherings where people got together for other aspects of church. In terms of the time, in terms of the involvement that people have had, it's probably for most people been almost exactly the other way up. Most of the interactions people have had will have been unplanned or semi-planned. They'll have been in smaller groups rather than bigger groups, and they will have often used, even out of lockdown periods, all kinds of modes of communication that were barely even worth mentioning. Telephone, for instance. So for some people, telephone may have been the predominant means that they chose, and for others, probably for younger people, it's natural to be carrying around a smartphone, and that's the primary mode of conversation, even when in some face-to-face setting. I'm sure we've all walked down streets and wondered at all these people who don't even seem to be aware of anything apart from the thing in the palm of their hand. That's their primary mode of communication. So through this period, obviously, to say something incredibly obvious, most people have started learning new ways of connecting or of using tools and technologies that were out there before and available, but they seem kind of niche, and bringing them into their daily life. So part of our question about how is live streaming going to engage our ministry means we have to start thinking very specifically about these different, well, what are they? What's the next word? How do you distinguish between all of these different options? Are they channels? That's the first thing perhaps that comes to mind if we have a broadcast mentality. There are different channels of communication because there is something happening somewhere and it comes to us via some channel. Or maybe it's platforms. Certainly Facebook is a platform. It's a huge world and lots of things are happening inside it. And part of that is individual and group and church and social and all kinds of other connections. YouTube is a different kind of platform. It's very much about video. The terminology isn't shared. It doesn't have one clear meaning. So it can be hard to even have the conversation about what does live streaming and in-person and connection, how does all that work? So I want to choose to use one term. I'm going to talk about modes of communication and think about four. Now, this is a massive oversimplification, but I think we have to start somewhere. So let's start with massive oversimplification. There is gathering, there's meeting people in person. There is the telephone. And in some ways, I want to think of that as, well, is the telephone a real thing? Of course it is, but it's also an entire universe. We take for granted that we don't have to know which operator, whether someone's on a fixed line or a mobile, whether it's a voice over IP line. It doesn't matter. The telephone is one mode which is familiar. It's kind of universal and widely used by some and less by younger people. Then we have online encounters of some sort, and I'm just going to call that video meetings. So we have video meetings, so examples being Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Whereby. There are other platforms, Jitsi, that people use to connect all in one place, all in one virtual place at one time and interact, like the creation of a virtual room. And then we have those social video platforms. So social video, I'm particularly thinking of Facebook as a social video platform and YouTube as a social video platform. So again, they have different dimensions in all sorts of ways, but those four, gathering, telephone, virtual rooms, and social video platforms, those four modes exist. And when we think about streaming in a church context, often what streaming means, if a church is streaming, they may well be engaging 3 or 4 of those modes in a particular way. So for instance, perhaps a service has been happening that's been completely online on Zoom, and then it's been broadcast out to a social video platform, YouTube. So some people have connected directly by Zoom, either by a video connection or by a telephone call, and some people are connecting via YouTube. And of course, what we're doing at the moment is we're connecting on YouTube and Facebook. Good news for those of us who prefer YouTube. We did manage to get YouTube live. Hooray! So we're today broadcasting out to both of those. So we can think, well, we've done it, haven't we? We've got all of those modes are now engaged, and that's what live streaming has done for us. But I'm not so sure, because I think most of us, and I definitely want to include myself in that, have started with, to some extent, we're recreating that same model, where we've got a sense that there is one gathering, there's a kind of a primary thing, and perhaps it's been from the manse or wherever it is. There's a place where the thing is really happening, and then there are these additional connections. So this is being sent out via all of these different pathways to connect with people. And that's great. That's been amazing. I know so many people who've been enriched by that hugely. But are we engaging? How are we engaging people? Are people finding those experiences engaging? And I think we have to acknowledge that at a first level, yes. To the alternative, which is we're all completely cut off from one another, then yes, this is tremendous. But actually, what are the measures of engagement for us as a church? There's something about, surely, depth of relationship, meaningful connection, the ability to minister and to respond. And there, we just have to recognize that what engagement means in those different modes is different. What are the expectations? They're different. If we gather what engagement means, actually, in the past, how have you measured engagement? I'm guessing for a lot of us, it's kind of bums on seats. We count the people who've come in the door and we've called that engagement. It's really just a proxy. Were people jumping up during the service and say, I like what you've just said? Perhaps in your church, that may have happened. But we've begun to get used in online worlds to being able to interact online in a way which surely we can, but in a church context, often we haven't during the course of a service. What will tomorrow's services look like? Neil's question again. Are we just going to forget everything that we've learned and run time backwards and say we're going to go back to all of that? Now let's recognize those different modes of communication have tremendous advantages. For some people, the telephone is a real lifeline. It's a very, very robust and predictable and manageable means of communicating. And I want to encourage all of us to think really hard about how to use a telephone service better. I don't suppose you were expecting in a session on streaming to be told to go back to the telephone. So it's not back to in order to say, well, that's the future, but it's back to in saying, now we're starting to understand communications technology differently. How can we make the telephone more engaging? Because often if people are experiencing live worship streamed out to them by telephone, that's probably an experience of receiving a broadcast. How do we close the gap for the telephone users? How do we make sure that we can build in interaction? What are the phone numbers that people can call? Do they know them? How are you distributing that around? When's the last time you looked through your phone records to see ingoing and outgoing calls and thought of those as measures of ministry, of measures of engagement, as measures that were vital indicators for the church? So I'm not going to work through each of those in detail, but I want to suggest an exercise to you. Remember at the beginning I said something about what if we each made an honest diary of all the ways we're interacting with people? So I'm going to make this suggestion. Why not recruit a number of people, as many as possible, whole congregations perhaps, and ask them to do just that? Keep not a highly detailed communications diary, but just a little rough journal that says, today, here are the interactions I had. Here are the times when I met people face to face. Or here are the number of times that I did that. Here's the number of times I made a phone call. Here's the number of times that I had a video call and so on. Let's actually replace what we're guessing about how people are engaging with one another out in the world with facts. What are we actually experiencing? Because when we start to work out how to make our worship engaging in a streaming context, we are going to have to start to understand, what are people's preferences? Where are the places they feel safest and most comfortable? Where are the places that they find most enriching? And how do we start to build back engagement in each of those channels? Not in a way that makes us focus suddenly on all of these communications modes, that we're suddenly thinking of ourselves, we have to be expert in that. No, this is not new activity. It's just recognizing that each of these modes of communication creates opportunity, and we have to be intentional about using them to build that sense of engagement with congregations. With which, I'm now stumbling to bring in Neil, who's going to be talking about, thank you, Brian, live streaming to enhance your ministry.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm going to say a word or two about probably internal church structures now, and the team involved in delivering online ministry. And I want to start with the tech team, not that, as I mentioned last time, live streaming should be a tech-driven project, but of course, necessarily, it does involve tech people. And ultimately, I think that live streaming and live streaming engagement belongs to quite a few groups within the church. And I'll touch on that just a wee touch later on. But first, a soft spot, of course, for the tech people, who are traditionally banished to the back row. At least in certainly many of the churches I've been around, it's the folks in the back. And this was probably never their vocation. They probably wouldn't even describe their role as ministry or a vocation. But I would encourage you, especially those of you who are ministers and pastors, to look upon your tech team as worship enablers, in the same way that somebody who welcomes somebody at the front door, who plays the organ, who undertakes a reading, who arranges the flowers. They are enabling and accessing, allowing others to access your ministry in a convenient, and certainly in COVID times, practical way. For those who need a hearing aid, for example, they enable those to hear well. The advances in projectors and screens and all this in church enables the visual message to be communicated as well as the audible message. And so I encourage you to think of them as part of the worship team. How many ministers, for example, when they pray, perhaps with a select few leading worship in the morning, would include the tech person either physically present or at least pray for the work that they will be doing. I think that's a key element, and I think it builds up the resource of those who are, quote unquote, in the back row to feel a vital and vibrant part of the worship service, much as those who are perhaps a little bit more up front, in front of the front pew, and a bit more visible. And then I think we need to understand typically, and I say this in a very broad brush sense, the type of person that is a tech person. And I speak as one of them as well. Typically not somebody who likes being in the limelight, being up front, but quietly and diligently goes around their business, enabling what needs to happen, and you potentially have no idea or no clue, and neither need you have, of the work they do in preparation for everything that they're doing for Sunday or whenever your time comes. But they need to be ministered to. I can tell you it's a very stressful job being in the back row, because increasingly there are huge expectations of tech. It used to be you just turn on the microphones and that was it. But even then, if there was any degree of feedback or howling, we all looked at the tech person going, well, what are you going to do about it? And now with screens and PowerPoint and Easy Worship and ProPresenter and live streaming and chat and Zoom, the pressures on those folks are just increasing, almost to the extent that could worship happen if we didn't even if something went wrong? And of course it can. One of the first things I say to our own team is, look, first of all, enjoy the experience. Be stress-free, or as stress-free as you can be within yourself. It's not the be-all and end-all if stuff doesn't work. We have a backup plan if folks can't make it on the rota. So if a streaming person, for example, can't make it, we'll turn the cameras on and we will just leave them. We'll turn them on, point them to the front, and forget about it for the rest of the service. Seeing a static shot is better than no shot at all. And nobody needs to be too stressed about it not happening. If there was a power cut, what will you do in the church building? Do you know what? We'll break out the hymn books. and the minister will shout loudly to the back of the hall, as his predecessors or her predecessors might have done 100 years ago. And make sure folks are aware of what a backup plan looks like, and that if something goes wrong, do you know what? It's okay. It's not their fault, and we're going to crack on with worship regardless. It might be that the folks at home might have to watch a recording later. In our area, the internet regularly, well, not regularly, but occasionally goes down. And we just put a message on the webpage saying, really sorry, the internet's down, it's not going to work, but we are recording it. And as soon as I get home, I'll upload it, and maybe 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, you can watch that in. But it's about giving your tech team all these little get-outs so they can have as stress-free a time, and they can exercise their ministry. The tech team weren't blessed with being one of the named spiritual gifts, but I think that's just an accident of chronology. I think we can absolutely define what they bring and add to our church in its widest sense as absolutely key and increasingly vital. And these folks should be invested in. And so my message to you as ministers and pastors is, how better can you embrace your tech team amongst all the other ministry workers and worship enablers on your Sunday. Moving, I guess, now to some church structures internally. If you're looking to start up live streaming, then you need to get a team together. Now, it will likely have some tech folks in it. I think it should have some mission folks in it, some pastorally hearted folks in it, and some young folks. And of course, these groups may overlap. The reason I'm keen that young folks are involved is this is their moment to shine. This is their world. And this is a chance for them to share something that they know, that they deal with day in and day out on their devices, and communicating quickly, speedily, effectively using a variety of platforms. This is perhaps the church they've been waiting for. This is perhaps the church you've been longing for, when you say, how do we get our young people into our church? And maybe, just maybe, this is the opportunity that says, here's a church that communicates in a way that is relevant and appropriate for me. Now, you might look and say, you know what, we want bums on seats and pews. And I would challenge you that I don't think anymore that that's really the measure of counting successful church. And I'm sure many of you would now agree with me. But this is a real chance, and begin that by taking young people on board into your groups. And then once they're on board, this is not a SOP, this is not tokenism, then listen to what they have to say. The challenging thing might be, you might not understand what they're going to say, but believe me, they know what they're on about. And I think it's incumbent upon you to listen and then to act. Now, that might mean you need more advice from others to interpret what young folks are saying or what they're asking, but don't dismiss it just because you've never heard of it. Or you've heard internet rumors about it. These things are always worth investigating and seeing where you might go forward with that. Once internet streaming and online communication is up and running, then I think you can disband your team, because I believe that then online ministry should become an integral part of the organizations you have already. Whether that's your mission and outreach, your discipleship, your pastoral care, your Bible study groups, Sunday, or I'm trying to get out of the habit of saying Sunday worship and just saying worship, your youth organizations, it should just become now just an implicit part of everything that they do and not a special thing. So for example, whenever a new idea comes up, we're going to have a garden fete, right? Oh, we should ask ourselves, and how are our online congregation going to engage with that? And that's a question. Now, it can be as simple as, well, we'll just take our mobile phone into the garden, and we'll not rip our cameras off the wall, but we'll do something that helps them to feel that they're part of it. We might rig up a loudspeaker and a microphone, we can talk to folks. You know, I'm not here to answer that question for you, but engage with it. And everything should be, and how will our online congregation engage with it? And I think if you are a minister or pastor, that can start with you, by making sure that in worship times, that everything you do is accessible to your online audience as much as it is to the physical audience. So, for example, if you're handing out a sheet of paper with sermon notes or a worksheet or something, then have a PDF available that the folks online can go download and access. It's a bit more preparation. Sure, of course it is. But you've got you have one congregation but in two separate communities to engage with. And so that would be my encouragement with you. And look forward to the day when your online ministry is just an integral and implicit part of your ministry. And lastly, just about ministry, I want to share just a testimony from our own congregation at St Andrew's Bowness. We've been streaming now probably 10 years or so, and I have many tales to tell. In fact, one of the when I speak to churches, one of the points I'm clear to make is never mind counting clicks and likes and Facebook hearts or hit counters. Don't count numbers, count stories. Count stories of lives transformed and lives changed because of a new interaction folks have with your church and your ministry and your congregation. And let that be the target for your success. And don't have false pride in these gigantic numbers Facebook and YouTube offer you. Instead, seek out and try and find the stories of how your ministry is reaching far and beyond. So let me tell you about a man called, we'll call him Tom. That's not his real name. And I'll try not to use his real name as we go through this story because it's a real person. And we'll call his wife Mary. And for those of you who don't know, it's in central Scotland, just about 10, 15 miles from Edinburgh. And Tom and Mary found our congregation online, and they were from Bournemouth, down on the south coast of England. I have no idea how they found us. Mary didn't keep well and was housebound, and Tom would chat to us. We have an online chat during the service and say how much he valued our ministry. And he said, "Thank you for giving us our Sunday back, giving us our week back. When you're housebound, every day looks the same." And for them, the discipline of going to church, even if that was a laptop on the coffee table, meant that they had a marker in their week that said this was Sunday. I have a wonderful vision in my head, and I don't know if it's true, of them dressing up. We need to dress up. We're going to church. He'd put his suit, his tie on, and they'd sit on the sofa watching. I have no idea if that's true or not. But they would engage and watch in on our ministry. Eventually, they wanted to become givers, and we set up a standing order, or they set up a standing order because they wanted to give to our congregation because they felt part of that congregation, and they would communicate weekly with us. One week, Mary went into respite care to give Tom a little break, and he was on holiday for a week. And I was walking up the pew, the central aisle at church one Sunday, and someone said hello to me. Oh, hello. I said, "I'm Tom." I nearly cried, still to this day. He came up to Bowness for his holiday because this was his congregation. This was where his home was. And we took him out to lunch afterwards, and he spent some time round and about. But this was his home. And even though it might have been 400 or 500 miles away, he came to seek out his congregation. A little later on in the year, his wife passed on. Flowers, like we would have done just if somebody was part of our own districts. We have internet can do these things. Internet and distance is no barrier. I ban the word virtual from my conversation, from my vocabulary. There's nothing virtual about the people, nothing virtual about the relationships, nothing virtual about the ministry. It's all very real. It's just in a very, very different way. So that's just one way. I have others too. This one touches me particularly, as you can probably tell. But this is a very real thing, and it's a very worthwhile thing. I'm excited that you are part of this. Brian, to you.
Yeah, Neil, unfortunately, you started to break up just at the end in terms of that, but the story was fabulous. And I just wanted to share before I went on to speak about extending our ministry. We've got one person in the congregation who told me that she joined in worship every week during lockdown
Mm,
and got dressed up,
mm,
got dressed in clothes that she would come to church because she said it was a marker in her week and it gave her a sense of place, a sense of belonging, and a sense of hope in what she was doing, and it was fabulous.
mm,
And
mhm,
yeah, these stories I think we've got there, and it would be wonderful if folks in the comments were able to maybe put some of their stories of how tech has touched people, because I think it's not about buttons, it's not about cables, it's
mm.
about people. And thanks for sharing that, Neil. Really, thank you very much. We'll come back to some of these things later on, but I'm going to be speaking a little bit about live streaming to extend your ministry. And what does extending our ministry mean? Well, in different contexts, that can mean very different things. In different places, it can mean different things. We're all busy in terms of ministry, I'm sure, but there's always the opportunity to extend things. Sometimes, though, extending things means, as Neil said, it's about getting the right group of people around you, and it's about ensuring that you have the skills around you to do that. But it's also sometimes about letting go of other things, some of those things that maybe drain our time or that others might be able to do better. I'm not the world's best pastoral visitor, but there are people in the congregation far more skilled at it than I am. Then again, I can solder a microphone cable or I can sort out a computer, and that's okay to use our gifts for God. And if we believe in the whole people of God, that we are all called and we are all participating in his mission in the church, then we've all got an opportunity to use those gifts. And in ministry, it's about leading people through that. I want to encourage you to think a little bit about what it means to extend our ministry. Some churches, and I'm very jealous of these buildings, have wonderful glass doors at the front of the building that as you walk down the street, you can look in and see life. You look in and you see things are going on. But equally, when those glass doors close and there isn't anything going on, I often wonder what sort of witness that is as well, for people to walk past and see an empty building. But then again, a church like mine that has big old-fashioned, big oak doors on the front that no one can see in, those doors can act as a barrier to some people, not knowing what's behind them, not knowing if they're welcome, not knowing the type of building, the things that go on. With our technology and with live streaming, we've got the opportunity to show something a little bit different. We've got the opportunity to show that our church door is now digital. And here's the thing, it's always open. Once you open that door, it can't be shut. Because what happens is people look at your door, they try and come in, and they see things perhaps on your digital notice board that have been there for the past 10 years. Your church door is now digital and it's always open. And we need to look at the ways that we allow people to access our church, the activities that are there, and the way that they engage with us. And there's a number of ways that we can do that. Technology is a tool to aid our mission. It's a tool. It's not going to do things of its own. It needs things behind it. It needs people behind it. It needs stories and relationships, ideas. It needs love. So as a tool, how can you work that? Well, very simple. You can manage data. You can keep in touch with people. But like Jeremy was saying earlier, look at your phone records. Have you got the right number for people so that you can actually exercise that ministry? You can nurture generosity. You heard there of the couple in Neil's church who wanted to set up a standing order because they felt part of that. And whilst money isn't why we do things, actually being part of a faith community, stewardship, giving, is a really important response to that which we receive from God in worship. And so we do have a duty to make sure that people can nurture that generosity. And there are ways that you can do that. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of these ways are incredibly frustrating to get set up and incredibly time-consuming. And you'd end up jumping through American hoops to define yourself as a church and who your beneficial owners are and everything like that. Apparently, God isn't a good enough answer for PayPal when it comes to that. But you do have a responsibility to nurture that generosity, both in terms of money, in terms of time, as Neil said, and in terms of our gifts. We can use technology to deepen relationships, to allow people to get to know each other, perhaps in Zoom rooms or breakout rooms, perhaps even on telephone trees. However we do it, we need to allow people to have that interaction to deepen relationships together. And then there's a huge responsibility on churches, especially when we're live streaming, that we need to nourish faith. And how we do that is something really challenging. How do you nourish faith in people that you might not ever meet in person? But the point of being a church that reaches out, that has a digital open door, is that we don't need to always meet people in person. We need to nurture people in faith. Technology and live streaming go beyond worship. It's not just about switching on a camera when we're worshipping. It's not just about broadcasting from here in my study or out in a field somewhere to look trendy and hip and pretend that we've got a camera that can go elsewhere. It's about more than that. Technology and live streaming has to be embedded in the very life of our congregation, from management and administration to mission to pastoral care. We need to think about how it is that we stream, what we stream, how we stream, and how we interact with people. I'm delighted that Margaret has just shared one of a brilliant comment there, that Paul in the Bible didn't meet the folk that he influenced. Perhaps we're not being radical, perhaps we're not being modern, perhaps we're actually being traditional and biblical by doing this sort of work and ensuring that people have the opportunity to gather. In Scotland, we have a proud tradition in many areas of keeping the Sabbath. Sometimes that can go a little bit on the difficult to stomach side, where play parks are chained up and things like that. But we do need to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Absolutely. That's a command that we need to take seriously. But whose Sabbath? My Sabbath? Your Sabbath? Is it my Sabbath that I keep because I work night shifts and really can only be around late in the evening to do things? Is it your Sabbath when you've had family and children and you've just grabbed a little bit of time in between nursery and school runs? Let's not get tied up in Sunday worship, but worship. Let's not get tied up about when we do things, but just do. We do need to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, but our digital world goes far beyond 1 hour or 1 day. It should be a 24/7 endeavour as much as we can make it. That takes people, it takes commitment, it takes finance, it takes energy as well. And then finally, we've got to think about what we do and how we do it. So is it about live streaming or recording our content? Is it about interactive or presentation? Is it a blend of both, like we just saw that we can use comments that people make live on screen? Is it a solitary endeavour where people are able to listen, to pray, to reflect, and to deepen their relationship with God? Or is it a group task where people can come together and live and work and grow in faith? Is it a passive or an active endeavour? Do we have tasks for people to do? Or is it a case that, like watching something on television, they take time and just watch? All of these things are okay. And as Jeremy talked about different modes of communication, different platforms, different ways of communicating, all of these ways are really important as well. Because people do things and learn in different ways. People communicate in different ways. We have to find the way that is right for us as a church, as a faith community. And that will be different in each and every community as well. So today I want you to think about ways that you can extend that ministry, ways that you can reach out using your digital footprint, recognizing that once you're there, and there may be people who are out there depending on you to fulfill your ministry to them within that space. It's easy to do things once and then let them slip. It's easy to do things, then forget about them. But in order to be a church that is missional and using live streaming and technology, we have to make sure that we keep going and keep facing and keep serving God.
Thank you, Brian. And I again, just to encourage you all to the comments are great, and we're seeing them. We'll be coming back to some of the questions shortly, but now I want to introduce our next topic and our next guest: funding your live streaming ambitions. We're going to go back to David to pick up with that. Over to you, David.
Thank you. Good afternoon, all. Good to be with you, and my first time on this sort of setup, so bear with me for any technical hitches. I'm David Williams. I'm the grants manager, newly appointed as of January in the Church of Scotland, working in the Assembly Trustees Department. And my job is to try and help the church to access funds outside the church, and also to administer a new fund inside the church, the new 2021 Small Grants Fund. That'll be for grants of up to £1,000, and those can be used for live streaming and similar activities, part of a missional approach. But we like to see it as part of a project rather than just saying we're going to buy a camera and then that's it. We want to say what are you going to do with it, how's it going to help you with your ministry, etc. And that should be open to churches to apply for as of June. So there'll be more information about that coming out shortly. The main point today is about the Adapt and Thrive Fund. So this is a fund which is Scottish Government funded, part of a £25 million pot. There were two strands to it. The first, the Community Recovery Fund, but that's now closed. But the part still open is the Adapt and Thrive programme, and that's now open until the end of June 2021. And very keen to see people applying for that. And I'll tell you more about what's been successful so far. The aim of the fund is to try and help charities to become more financially flexible and stable after the COVID pandemic. Lots of text on the left that I can't see and you can't see, and that's fine, because what it really means is that it's open to churches to apply. So churches can make applications to this fund. The minimum amount of funding is £5,000, and that's a hard minimum. If you go for £4,999, they'll reject the application, or £5.20, they'll reject the application. Anything with £5,000 and above, that will be fine. The maximum amount is £75,000, and the maximum amount that I've seen so far from a church is about £36,000 that's been successful. So there is money there available for churches to use. There's the age-old question: how do you get information out to churches about this? How do you share the information? So what we've done is send out an email via the Presbytery Clerk's office out to the Principal Clerk's office to all churches across the Church of Scotland, to ministers, to session clerks, and also out to property conveners. That went out about beginning into middle of February. Since then, I've had over 130 churches apply for, come to me asking for support in making an application to the fund. And as I said, applications are now open until the end of June. Originally, it was the end of March, but now the government's seen as being so successful that the end of June is now their preferred date. Now, how does this process work? Well, you're advised to get an application form in. They're available on the Adapt and Thrive website. Just Google Adapt and Thrive or whatever search engine you use. Search for Adapt and Thrive, and the SCVO website will pop up, or should do. On there, there's a Word version of the form, so you can fill it in offline, get it all ready before you then copy it to the online form. So should your broadband go down, you haven't lost the whole thing. You can still go back to the form you started in Word. Once the application is in, they will then appoint you an advisor. The advisors are a great bunch of people, very knowledgeable of social enterprise activities, of various charities, and very much able to support churches in making their application better. They're there to help you hone your application and improve it. They're there to try and help you to work on a cash flow analysis, because the whole idea is their investment should help you to become more financially stable. And therefore, you need to demonstrate that that's the case, showing that you're going to get a bit more income because of it. And I think churches aren't very used to thinking in those terms of income and expenditure. Well, not income and expenditure. Church is a business. So the question is, how will the use of money trying to help you to buy more kit for your online presence, how will that help you to become more financially stable? Now, what we've done is we've built a relationship with these advisors. They came to me a few weeks after the emails went out to across the Church of Scotland, and said, we've now got quite a lot more applications coming in from churches, so that's really good. But it's clear that from the applications, there's a range of skills from people making the application. What we've done is put together for you a little pro forma that's available from me, and that's allowing you to interpret the questions, which are true for all charities, to be interpreted in the context of church. So this is really very helpful of them to give us this information so that we can try and improve the quality of applications going in from churches. Then once the advisors worked with you on the application, it will then go forward to the assessment panel, and they should get back to you, I think it's within 21 days of it going to assessment. So it's a pretty fast turnaround fund. You should hear from an advisor within about a week, then work with them over the next few days, then into the assessment panel, and within 21 days thereafter, you should hear back as to whether you've had successful application or not. Successes so far. Well, 16 churches have now had a successful application to Adapt and Thrive, with many more still in the pipeline. The total value of that funding has been over £250,000. So the average amount of funding has been about £16,000 so far. Now, why are AV systems accepted as being a good way of generating income or helping to improve the stability of your church? Some work from Brendan Research showed that before the pandemic, I think it was about 20% of churches were doing something online, if that. During the pandemic, in some form, over 90% of churches have been providing something online. So as we come out of the pandemic, we're still trying to support churches in being present online for all the reasons you've heard so far today. So what are they funding? They're funding AV systems and also online giving systems that will go with that. So if you're trying to engage with both those who would normally attend church and those who've been attracted to church because it's online and available in their comfort of your own home, then trying to engage with them in other ways, trying to provide an opportunity for them to give a free will offering or some other form of offering would be great. Other churches have also applied for other things like awnings, so they can effectively extend church into an outdoor space. So should lockdown or some other form of pandemic restriction be required, that's still possible, but still people can still meet outside. Some reordering of their sanctuaries, so taking out of pews and putting in flexible chairing, again, COVID related, but allowing then the space to be used for rental, hall rental, sanctuary rental. And with the AV system in place as well, that also allows you to add the value of the AV system to that hall rental. Some churches are taking on part-time hall booking staff, again paid for by Adapt and Thrive, to promote the spaces they have available, because a big chunk of income for churches is that available through hall rental. And also there's some fundraising advice funding perhaps available to allow you to engage with the fundraiser to help you with what you need for the future. So happy to take any questions about that. Adapt and Thrive, great source of funding, £5,000 and above, and are very much there to help you gain access to funding that can also help with your audiovisual requirements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. So I'll give it a little moment for other questions to be coming through, and I'm going to bring the rest of the team out as well.
Out of hibernation, there we go. David, there was one question that somebody asked, which I think is important, and that was from Sam. Do you know if there's anything similar to Adapt and Thrive in England or beyond Scotland? Have the government put any funding in place that you know?
Not that I'm aware of, but my focus has been much north of the border.
Yeah.
But I'll take a look, and if there is anything, I'll let you know for the next session.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I should probably ask a supplementary question then. Would a Church of Scotland based outside Scotland be able to apply?
No, you have to be Scotland-based.
Scotland-based, right, okay.
Yeah. I can see the wheels already turning in my mind as to where we need to go with this. But yeah.
I'm really encouraged to hear about the success of churches applying for AV stuff, because I can imagine it would be encouraged actually to hear, especially those 16 churches that have had successful applications so far. That's really great.
Of the 16, I estimate there's about half of them have gone for AV systems of some sort.
Yeah.
The first one we saw success was the Barn Church in Culloden. They in fact were given slightly more than they applied for because they had offered to put some of their own money in from their own reserves. The assessors had taken a look at their accounts and said, actually, we don't think you can afford as much as that. Let us top it up for you. So there's a very even-handed approach, and it's really good to see.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Oh, yeah, you've brought that up there. I was just about to reach for the same thing. One congregation, this is from Ellen, one congregation is wondering about how we link a sanctuary with a church hall when a few hundred yards away, and if the Adapt and Thrive is a way to seek some funding.
It could well be. As I said, the thing you have to demonstrate is that this will help you with the financial stability in the future of your church. So if you can demonstrate that perhaps the need to link the two together so more people can see what's happening online, or perhaps a way of holding larger fundraising events and engaging with more people, then you can demonstrate how that could then generate revenue, and that's the important part for this fund.
You see, I misinterpreted that question, David. I thought she was talking about a tunnel or an overhead flyover with a moving platform that could take people between, but I now get the word link is technology, and I should have got that considering we're on the church tech chat. But it is, I think it's brilliant that this funding is there and that churches are, because you and I have spoken at times, David, about the fact that very often churches are excluded from a lot of funders just because they are church.
I think that's often also misinterpretation. So some funders do say that they won't fund religious activity.
Exactly.
What they don't mean is they're not, sorry. What that means is they will fund religious bodies to do stuff in the community as long as it's not a requirement to be engaged in the religious stuff for that to happen.
Yeah.
So, that's a key thing, because churches can access some of this funding if they make an application, but it can't be to promote religion.
Yeah.
It can be to engage with the community. And then if you want to offer some religious stuff as well, then that's possible, but not with that funding.
I remember many years ago, there was a report done at SCVO about how funders shouldn't be scared of religious bodies effectively, and that they are useful to the community life, and
They generate an
essential.
awful lot of value. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, David, what we'll do is we'll come back to you if there's any further questions. So stay with us just now, and we'll look at some of the tech things. Thanks very much for just now. Really
Pleasure.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
I wonder if I could ask a question just before we allow folks just to start typing. It's a question to the two ministers. Is this something that, is this a flash in the pan? And actually, once COVID's over, we can forget all about it? Or do we need to be training our ministers now in newer communication skills and how to engage with remote communities? Is that something that needs to happen at minister level?
Certainly, yes, in the Church of Scotland. I mean, with the greatest of respect to those who trained me in the training system that was there at the time, I wasn't trained in communication systems or how to lead worship. It was more a get on with it and we'll tell you if you're any good. And I think that we need to start looking at how we intentionally train people for this sort of thing, because even 5 years ago, if you'd have asked most ministers, would they be doing this? The answer would have been a flat no. We don't have time, or that's not where my people are, or blah, blah, blah. And yet we've got 80-year-olds getting high-speed broadband in our communities to speak to folks. I mean, it's just incredible, the advancing. And I worry that church is going to be left so far behind, it's going to make the laughable situation of a church with 24 cine screens and an overhead projector still in use like something that's normal. I mean, we need to be keeping ahead of this, and if we don't have proper leadership in it at a local level, I think we're going to be doing a disservice to our worshipping communities and our wider parish communities as well. Jeremy?
I think something that I'd like to sort of add in, a little thing which always goes around in my head, is fact beats opinion, and we all need to be realistic at the moment that the opinions that we have based on the experiences we had back pre-2020, they're outdated. And my experience in my little area was, initially we took everything online on video, but we also took everything onto telephone conferencing services, because very quickly everyone in the congregation either could directly get access to those telephone conference services, or they could help somebody else get onto them. But we stuck with streaming because we knew that the tide would probably start to move, and it didn't really move because the church moved the needle. It moved because families were connecting with one another. So all of a sudden, people started talking about all these different systems they were using to keep in touch with their family who they couldn't see any other way. And so people's lives have changed, and the danger is we make a whole lot of assumptions about how their lives have changed, which technologies they're comfortable with and at ease with and used to using, which ones are they going to be using into the future. I think now is a really good time to remove all of the assumptions based on past experience and reach out to people and ask them, what actually is your experience? And that question of engagement, where are people finding depth and meaning? That is changing now. And I think as a church minister, that's incredibly exciting, because people are, for instance, a few years back, people were saying, well, apathy rules. No one is asking deep questions. Well, go online and you'll discover there's all sorts of other things, not just occasionally you'll find outright hostility and wild sort of crazy talk going on online, but also you'll find people who are exploring and engaging in a different way. And sometimes it's easier for people to ask a question in a remote way that's mediated and protected, they feel safe in, that they would never dream of asking in church. One of the great problems, I think, for gathered church is it's hard to have honest, deep conversations in church. Well, these technologies give us all kinds of opportunities. Think of things like breakout rooms, where people can move from being in a big group to being in smaller groups and having deeper conversations. I think the excitement for me, the risk is that we fall backwards. The excitement is that we do just like Paul did, embracing the communications of the Roman Empire, that we actually say we've got better ways of helping one another to connect and explore this sort of journey together with God. It's just it's exciting, but now is not a time to be complacent or to say the answers will come and I'll just copy what everyone else is doing, because we will be left behind. We'll look irrelevant.
But Jeremy, do you not think that whole assumption thing, there's actually another level of that as well, and that is that we somehow have to work to remove the assumptions of the people in the community, in the parish, in the church, that this is not how we do church.
Right.
And we can speak to our family on Zoom, and we can use FaceTime, and we do that, and it's fabulous. I see my grandchildren. Would you like to come to the church service? Oh, no, I can't use that technology. That's not for church. And I think there's some real challenges there.
Yeah, but there's a couple of stories that I think again, I think Neil's story was tremendously moving, and a couple of people have given similar stories in the comments. That's what changes things, is when there are real experiences. So I was talking to a church minister a few weeks back who has been having a service in care homes handled remotely and in a sort of slightly hybrid way. And that opportunity to say we're going to bring the technology into that context because it's obvious. Suddenly we're able to use these technologies to give people more of a sense of connection with a real congregation. So previously, before lockdown, they were used to seeing the small group of people who went into the care homes regularly to lead a worship service. Now they're seeing those people and whole congregations and feeling engaged. Those stories are what changes the assumptions.
Yeah.
But also, I think going and asking people, what are you actually using? What are the tools that you value? And saying, well, actually, how could we use those? Just pose the challenge. How can we use that in a church context to bless one another and the people that we long to bless in God's name?
We had a wonderful situation where we were broadcasting before lockdown, obviously, and we had a care home join us every week. They took their residents into their cinema room and they joined us, and they thought it was fabulous. So we decided that one week we would close the building and we would go and worship there. And the whole congregation went up to the care home and worshipped with all the people there. And the smiles across the faces were just incredible. There was one older resident there who was in tears because she got to see the children who were running about on a Sunday morning on the broadcast, running about their living room. And they put on lunch for us. It was just a profound moment of community when that happened. So yeah, that mixing and going there.
I noticed Jenny has just put up a comment on it.
I was just going to come to that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, incredibly exciting. Among a small leadership group, I encountered enormous, strident opposition to doing anything other than return to the old known ways, and I think that's going to be a reality for lots of us. Either just by default, there's an assumption that we'll settle back to a level, or people are saying, actually, now we can do church the proper way. We have to. How would you respond to that, Brian?
Well, yeah, I mean, Stuart Cutler raised this a little bit earlier as well and talked about is it okay to do things for the different expressions of church that we have and not just replicate the same thing in both places and do things badly. And I think last week we talked about that intentionality and about making sure you know who it is that's watching. I think there is a real issue for us going back to those old ways because they're comfortable. And I think that partly there's a challenge there for us as ministers to say, no, do you know what? We're going to keep going with this. But that means, as I said earlier, we're going to have to stop doing some other things. Otherwise, we're going to break. We can only do so much. There's only so many hours in a day, even although I tried to make at least 42 in yesterday. But we need to think about how we're going to do that. I think where it comes to leadership, I do wonder if we have to have an honest conversation with church leadership, and not only about the assumptions that you talked about, Jeremy, but also about their ability to either enable mission within the church or block mission within a church. And that's a really uncomfortable place, but I think we have to do it. And I think as ministers, those of us who are, there is a bit of a duty there, a bit of a hard conversation that comes with calling to actually say, okay, you've called me as minister, you've asked me to lead, this is where God is leading us. We have to go down that route. And that won't always be met with universal acclaim, but I do think perhaps it gives people the opportunity to look at their involvement, to look at their mission, and hopefully not step back because it's not their thing, and hopefully catch a vision, or hopefully perhaps even take on some of the other tasks that allow others who are called in this way to serve. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a property manager. We've got people who can do that. We need to look at how people serve in churches.
Can I put that question back to Neil, actually, because I think that connects with his idea that you form a team, and then one of the signs of success is that you disband a team. So Neil, what's your experience when churches have found that challenging to get people engaged and enthused to form that initial team?
I think it's a bold step. I tell a tale of a congregation I went to speak to and asked them about how, I challenged them about how their new live streaming was going to fit into their offline mission strategy. And to their credit, they said, actually, we don't have an offline mission strategy. We didn't. And I said, well, how will this fit in? Or are you just putting cameras in? And to their credit, they said, you know what, Neil, you're absolutely right. And they went away for 6 months and got their mission strategy sorted out, offline and online, in person, and what was going to be online. Then they called me back and we started again. And I thought that was a tremendous commitment by that congregation, because we haven't got this right yet. We need to get the foundations right in order that we can then say, yes, this is an integral part of our mission and ministry. And that I'm sure that was some bold. They were very excited about doing the cameras and the TV thing. So bold thinking, confident thinking, and I appreciate Brian's comment about if you're not for us, then please don't be against us. Either let us crack on and don't be a stumbling block, or you know what? Better still, step up and come and learn something, perhaps even from our young people. And just to pick up on Stuart's before we lose sight of it, on thought of not everything is for online church. Yes, absolutely, absolutely right. My only encouragement would be, you won't do the thing because you've thought about it, not because you didn't think about it. So if you consciously say, yes, this isn't for an online experience, or indeed this online experience isn't for in-person experience, that's great, but at least you gave it consideration. And that's all I would ask.
Yeah. I think that listening to young people thing is really important, Neil, in all this, that we've an opportunity to allow young people to be a part of our church like never before. And if we don't grab this opportunity, what does it say about us as not just an organization, but organizations, but churches, but the Church of Jesus Christ in our community, that we were too stubborn, too set in our ways, too fixed in our opinions about how we communicate the story of God, that we weren't willing to listen to those who might be able to help us do it in a different way.
Yeah. One thing I loved about what you said earlier, Neil, was talking about stopping thinking about Sunday worship and talk about worship, and recognizing that actually we are expanding the possibilities here for people to engage in different ways, and that ought to be incredibly exciting. But finding what will actually light that spark with people, it's definitely going to be a challenge, I think, for all of us. But also keeping the conversations like this going, and being honest that there aren't one size fits all answers. There aren't quick routes we can say, here's the right thing to do. But actually, if we're working together and sharing good practice and good stories and discovering everything that God can do with us and through us in these times, it's got to be exciting.
And I think every church who has been live streaming already and provides a recording should provide testimony to the fact that more people watch the recording than watch live. And does that not give you a clue about 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning?
Good point.
Absolutely.
The only other thing I wanted to just add is for those people who are kind of completely resistant to the idea, maybe one of the other places to start is something like a prayer meeting. Because it's so obvious that if we want to, for instance, have a prayer meeting without too much notice, actually making people able to connect in a hybrid or online way, it's so obvious that that's a good and available solution, and it's meaningful. Those things don't have to be streamed. In fact, probably a prayer meeting arguably shouldn't be, but just building that comfort that we can use these tools in a church context, and it's not somehow disrespectful. It's a proper way of doing things. It's actually glorying in this new opportunity.
And if you go back to what I was saying earlier about the nurturing faith, deepening relationships, that type of thing, it's so important that we offer these opportunities. It really is. Guys, I want to bring David back in because we're talking about ministerial formation and training there. David spoke to us on our chat about a project in New Zealand. David, what are they doing over there for ministers? Oh, David, you're muted. There you are.
That's the quote of the year, isn't it? You're on mute.
Well.
So what's been happening? I've been working with another group looking at how you can look at the effectiveness of new worshiping communities. So what are they doing? How are they operating? How can you do it apart from the bums on seats or cash in the collection plate model? And I'm talking to Presbyterian Church in America and in New Zealand and the Church of England south of the border to see what they're doing in these different areas. When talking to New Zealand, I discovered that they've got an interesting training program for their ministers, whereby, and I don't know if this has actually been taken through to actual usage, but they've been trialing it. The minister in training, when they go into a new parish for the first time, they're given a bit of money to do some research work, looking at what the local needs are or how the church can get alongside the current strengths in that community. And then they're asked to devise a project and then to apply for external grant funding. So it then gives them grant writing application skills. And if they get that money, they can run the project for a year. So it gives them the opportunity to do some research, to do some activity in applying for grant funding, and then running a project with using volunteers and perhaps building partnerships with other local groups. And that's a great skill set then for those training ministers to use in the rest of their ministering lives. Great stuff.
Brilliant idea. It really is. And just even to think about your own community, I think when we start a new parish, we are so quickly into the funerals and the rhythm of that week that we don't stop to look around and see what the need is. And as you were saying, Jeremy, now is the time to do that. Now is the time to find out how people are communicating with us, connecting with us, and where we're going. Fascinating. Well, listen, folks, see, just before we finish, there's a couple of things. Ellen's put up a quote that I think we're going to need to come back to another day about. I remember hearing someone say it's better to be consistent and mediocre than inconsistent and brilliant. Be reliable and be there. I think, yeah, we'll definitely unpack that one and come back to that, Ellen. But the number of comments that have been made about people who have been coming together with family, and we've got one family in our church who another branch of the family stay quite a while away, and they're sitting down at the same time to join in worship so that they feel they're doing the same thing. Just incredible. Jenny, and I know she's just had to leave, but hopefully she'll see this, that she received a letter in response to one of the online services from a lady she doesn't know, addressed to Dear Morning Service. Brilliant. People feel that connection. And then just very, very finally, from Sam. Thank you, Sam, for this. And I think this sums up the whole thing. We can't go back. It would be like slamming the door in the face of some of our new congregants, telling them they are no longer welcome in our church simply because they can't join us physically. Now, those are strong words, and they might sound harsh to people, but that's the net effect of not taking this forward and doing it. Neil, what's your one fear of the post-pandemic situation with churches?
I mean, it's pretty obvious that we go back the way we were. It would be such a shame. I mean, we've been streaming for a little while before COVID, but we've still learned lots of things on the journey. And my fear is that we don't learn our lessons and we don't grab the opportunities that we've had since over this last year. We've had for the cause has been desperate, but the result, let's take what we can as silver linings from this. And one of them has to be, this is an opportunity to do church differently.
What about you, Jeremy?
Thank you. So thanks again, David. It's been really helpful to hear your wisdom on grants, and do everyone get in touch if you're in north of the border. Lots of assistance to be gained. So just a quick reminder that this is the second now of 6 sessions where we're going through streaming step by step. And the next one is going to be on the tech end to end. So I realize that for lots of you have lots of questions, and certainly if you're thinking at the moment about what might a good grant application look like, how can we make use of technology, how does it all fit together? So now is a brilliant time, and I suspect that Neil is going to be taking a strong lead on that. There are other sessions around. If you haven't signed up on the website to be part of the email list, please do. If you haven't received too much on the directly from the website, that's my fault, and I'll make sure that we start to fix that. And do put in, do send us any comments, any areas that you especially want to cover, any questions that it didn't quite fit any of the sessions, and so on, because we want to make sure that we keep these sessions completely tuned to what the questions that you're asking, and the help and assistance and encouragement that you want. So it's time to sign off, and thanks. It's great to connect with you all, and see you all next week for another Church Tech Chat.
See you, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.